Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this incredible session. I am very honored to introduce Vic Smith, who is a technology specialist at Laura Deering Elementary School. They have 5 years experience of teaching at CCSD and Title I schools. And I am very much looking forward to having this opportunity to listen to this amazing presentation, as well as learn everything that Vic needs to share. Just to let everybody else know, my name is Fran Bromley Norwood. I am the administrator for computer science for the Clark County School District, and I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation as much as all of you. Vic, please go ahead, take it away.
Hi, everybody. So I am so excited to be talking to you today about building and implementing a diverse technology library. Just so you know, I do have my name and my title and my pronouns here. I would like that to be noticed because if you do want to share resources with colleagues or other people that you network with, please just make sure that you use they, them pronouns. My children use this at the school, so I know it can be done. Diversity and identity is a big part of this conversation today, so I did want to start with my own. So just a quick kind of 4-point about what we're going to learn about today. In this session, we're going to talk about how the USA children's book publishing industry and computer science enrollment in the USA and Nevada does not include gender and racial diverse students, or perhaps maybe not to the extent that we wish it did. We're going to develop some strategies to identify gender and racial inclusive picture books for computer science classes and topics. We're going to discuss a little bit, hopefully, about how to acquire gender and racial inclusive computer science picture books, and of course, how to teach K through 5 NVAC standards using gender and racial inclusive picture books. Now, I have a very long presentation, so I'm probably not going to get to 3 and 4, and I think that's okay. The most important parts really are going to be 1 and 2, and I will share the slide deck at the end of the session. And I think all of the slides for 3 and 4 are straightforward enough that asynchronously you will be able to benefit from all of the content I put together to share with you today. So just as, I guess, a disclaimer, please prioritize your well-being and comfort. I know it's not everybody's jam to talk about gender and racial inclusion in a Saturday morning. So if that's not your jam today, it is still early enough to join another session. If you have questions and you want to message me privately, I will share my contact information at the end of the session, and you are more than welcome on Zoom to find this everyone button. I should be at the top because I'm one of the hosts, and so you're welcome to message me as well. I'm going to take about 30 seconds. Are there any ground rules we would like to set as a group before proceeding? Gender and race can be difficult topics to feel and think through, so I just want to honor perhaps some feelings that we might have in the room. Awesome. Sorry, that's my timer to make sure I'm honoring think time. Learning to lean into discomfort and assume positive intentions. That's great. Love that one. One that helps me during conversations like this is using I-based language to honor that perhaps feelings or experiences we have are individual and not necessarily representative of everybody's experience. Awesome. Showing respect to everybody's opinion. Awesome. I'm really great that we have some of these ideas already. I started with this intentionally because when you begin a conversation around gender or race in your classroom, it can be scary. And so there are kind of 3 things to prioritize when you lead these conversations. And the first is creating ground rules to set the tone of whatever conversation you want to have. The second would be facilitating the conversation as it happens. And the last part is processing feelings and thoughts as they occur and at the end. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to give us lots of opportunities to engage in the chat, as well as to have some reflection time. So this is a discourse-driven presentation. Words have power, and that's why I really want to focus on words, demographics, and representations of narratives today. These topics can be uncomfortable to begin, but if we work together, we can practice and learn. By making it comfortable to ourselves as educators, this is going to help us as we introduce these topics and include more diverse materials in our own lessons. And so one thing that I noticed during both the keynote speaking and the previous session were some questions about how to engage with each other in the chat. So find this icon in your Zoom chat, and I blocked out the names for privacy, but if you hover over a comment, it will give you a plus sign here, and this is how you can reply to other people in the chat. You can add reactions, and if you press these three little buttons, you can copy or quote other messages. So feel free to use these tools as we continue our conversation. So before this presentation, I looked through that Scratch link that I linked at the very beginning. And this is an example of my identity wheel. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, but what do you notice, or what do you think you can tell about me just by looking at this wheel? Because this is a visual representation of data, which is one of our computer science standards, but it's also rooted in diversity and identity. So just what are some things that you notice, or what are some things that you wonder? And drop that in the chat. Multilingual. So the gray categories are actually the categories that I chose for identifying. So I'm actually monolingual. And I reset my timer, sorry if it's loud, just to give us a little bit more time. Doing this now, I think I realized I should have perhaps started with if we are familiar with identity wheels in general and like how to actually read this data. Okay, identify a lot with the inner circle. Yeah, so these inner circles here represent privileged identities. The outer circles represent targeted identities that may be vulnerable to systemic injustice. And there are also spokes in the middle of the wheel, because as we know, we are not just composed of complete privilege or complete vulnerability. And so, yeah, these are, I'm seeing a lot more responses. I hope that explanation helped understand what we're looking at a little bit more. But what I really want to point out is that individual identities and who we are as people are mixtures of both privilege and oppression. So when we talk about identity and diversity, we tend to talk about it as this one singular thing. But as you can see from the wheel, I am composed of multiple identities. Some of these identities are very privileged and some of them are not. And so we need to be intentional about the intersections of where our identities exist, and also which identities are visible and which are invisible. So for example, when I encounter my students, I know that they're going to perceive me as white, but they may not know other things about me, such as my income level or my gender. So why does the color change the inner circle if you choose the middle circle? Basically, the gray options are what was chosen. This is the Scratch video game. So when you run the program, whatever you choose grays out. And so we're looking at the gray. I think that we could all agree if we redesigned this wheel, we would change it to the colors and maybe leave the gray out portions as the non-options. So even now we're improving computational artifacts as a result of a collective diverse group. And I love these ideas. And so, yeah, final point, single identities are reductive. We are a product of our intersections. And that's a big part of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So for all of our 42 participants, 43 including myself, thank you for remaining in community today for this presentation. And yeah, let's move on. So just a little bit about me and my experience with multicultural education, as well as computer science, diversity, and inclusion. When I was an undergrad at UNLV, I used to do diversity workshops. So the wheel I just showed you on Scratch is actually I would say it's on the modification scale of SAMR of the paper and pencil worksheets that I used to do for undergraduate students as UNLV. I started to research children's literature at Ohio State in 2017. I didn't graduate with my degree, and I'm very public about that because, as we know, we learn from our mistakes and we learn from failure. And so I did take very important lessons away from that, and it did spark this lifelong interest in children's literature in all the content that I teach. In 2020, I attended a children's literature summer school with the University of Antwerp. And so I also went to an NEH National Endowment for the Humanities 2-week seminar on identity and multilingualism through picture books. And I recently completed SISTA's course on identity inclusion for K through 12 computer science. So all three of these resources, I'm going to present a lot of resources today, resources. My coffee's kicking in. I'm going to present a lot of research, and most of that research is a result of these three experiences. So I just wanted to be transparent about where this information is coming from. So just real quick, let's now start shifting our focus into picture books. Please find this reaction icon in Zoom and choose one of these three emojis. How do you currently use picture books in your computer science classrooms? Okay, I see some hearts. We got some brave educators. See some thumbs up. I see some shocked faces. And thank you for your honesty. Not all of us are going to start at this level with hearts, and that's okay. So my hope is that by the end of the presentation, you at least have some ideas about which picture books to choose and possible titles to acquire to help you start moving toward the spectrum of adding picture books into your lessons. But I really love that we are a group that wants to include these picture books even more. So I'm going to add 30 seconds. Yes, I will add 30 seconds to the clock. Just in the chat real quick, why do you think diverse picture books matter in our computer science classrooms? What are your initial thoughts? Representation matters. Students need to see people who look like and represent them. Windows and mirrors, love that. Students need to see themselves. Promoting identity and self-esteem, reaching all students, making connections, multiple groups, equity. These are really great ideas. And yeah, I am so impressed by all the ideas you all generated in just 30 seconds. This is a great start. And I hope that with all of these feelings that we are voicing right now, I hope that I can present you today some research that when you do go to your admin and ask for a budget to acquire picture books, that this can start making others feel the same way that we are articulating right now. So I'll begin with NVACs. Identity, diversity, and inclusion is already in NVACs. And so I've pulled out 2 of the practice standards. These are more about how students should be accomplishing the content. So what students are expected to be able to do. And I know that these are all very lengthy, but maybe look at 1 or 2. What words from our practice standards stand out to you in regards to inclusion, diversity, or identity? And just drop just a word or two, or maybe a phrase into the chat. Include, diverse, unique, equitable, reflect, unique perspectives, include and create, advocacy, peer advocacy, broad accessibility, equitable, enable, yeah, diverse perspective, perfect. I'm going to use timers a lot, and it's to keep myself on task, not all y'all. I wish I could just let this chat keep going because this is amazing. Yeah, these are really great things to notice. I've highlighted some just that stood out to me in advance, but diverse picture books are a way to get students to start thinking, practicing, and modeling these behaviors that we want them to do, or ways of communicating and collaborating with others. So when I started looking for computer science picture books, almost every single book that you see on the screen right now, it was listed on every single blog post I could find. And these, quite frankly, are great books. But I want you to think right now, who is represented and who is not represented? And I'll give you 30 seconds to just drop some ideas in the chat. Girls are represented. We don't see any boys on the cover. Yep, we have children of color represented on a lot of these covers. That's very important. Multi-abled, so people of different abilities aren't represented. So we don't see anybody perhaps in a wheelchair, but we see able-bodied girls. And yeah, Hispanic and Asian characters are not on these covers, or maybe immediately identified as those ethnicities. And so when I was looking at these picture books, I thought to myself, this is a great start. I'm so glad that this is inclusive. But when I look at my classroom, this does not represent who is in my class. And so I wanted to find books that could bridge all of the experiences for the children in my class. And I'm sure that you have felt similarly. So as mentioned in the chat, there is this theory of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And this is a framework that was developed by Emily Stile. And it's funny because in her initial post about it, she was actually talking about a Peanuts comic strip. So it wasn't even about necessarily like a realistic depiction. What this means is that children are going to identify with materials they are presented with as a mirror, a window, or a sliding glass door. In mirrors, students are identifying with the content presented to them. In windows, they may not be able to identify with it, but they can perceive it and begin to build awareness about it. In sliding glass doors, students begin to build empathy toward what they are seeing. And so when I encountered this kind of framework, mirrors and windows made sense to me, but I didn't really understand the difference between windows and sliding glass doors. So does anybody want to take a quick guess about the main difference between windows and sliding glass doors? Empathy is a big one, but you can still begin conversations about developing empathy with windows. It is a big part of it though. Any other guesses? And it's okay if there's not. This kind of blew my mind. So to kind of go back to Emily Stile, when she created this idea of windows and mirrors, it was about Peanuts comics. And so it was about children and how they were responding to the material. And so the big difference between windows and sliding glass doors has to do with this matter of fictional or non-fictional. In windows, children can view things like little robots or animals, which they are not little robots or animals, but they can still kind of develop ideas and empathy for whatever topics are being discussed. Sliding glass doors is a third concept that was added to the framework by Black feminist scholar Rudine Sims Bishop. And she created this in response to the fact that just because there are depictions of children of color doesn't mean that those are respectful representations. And so she was calling out the distorted and laughable representations of Black children that were in these books about windows, or the fact that why is it that children can grow greater empathy for aliens rather than POC children characters in the book. And so the idea of sliding glass doors is that these are books that open up potential for students to literally walk through the door and join in community with real living racial and gender groups. And so sliding glass doors is more about real people and developing empathy for students in your classes, their peers who are not represented. So when I went to the children's summer school at University of Antwerp, I met Sarah Park-Dalen. Her research at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign is about Korean diaspora and transnational Korean adoption. And so she collaborated with an artist named David Huck, and it was sponsored by the CCBC at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We'll talk a little bit more about their data in a bit. And they created this infographic in 2015. And so same as the previous slides, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. What are some things you notice looking at this infographic? What stands out to you or what surprises you? Huge underrepresentation of some groups, yep. Animals are more represented than diverse humans. Not much diversity. Facial expressions, yes. We got some good visual literacy here. I would like to see if the data has changed since 2015. I have that data for you. Yeah, awesome. So keep this visual in mind. We're going to look at an updated version from 2018. And here it is. I'll give you a couple of seconds because we're going to look at them side by side. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to digest it in a big form. It is still very scary, yes. And that's why our work with bringing in diverse picture books into our classrooms is pivotal to growing empathy and collaboration skills with our students. Yes. So here are the statistics and the infographics together. And just 30 seconds, what do you notice that has changed or not changed from 2015 and 2018? Animals and other groups went up. Yep, we can see that right here. More animals. Yep, we see more Latinx. That demographic almost doubled. Gender identification is not represented in either graphic. That's a great observation. Yeah, so even though some of these demographics have improved in terms of greater equity, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are there. And one thing I do want to point out about the proportional numbers here, the picture book industry really went through a boom in 2014. So the number of books is increasing as well. So even though it might seem like some of these numbers went down, specifically in regards to white children, it's still possible that this 50% of books could be a greater total amount than the 73% published in 2015, because the amount of books that has been published itself is increasing. And yeah, one quick thing about the animals, that is the reason that Kim mentions in the chat. Animals are often used as a stand-in to talk about race or gender, and it comes from a central belief that it's easier to talk to children about these topics through animals or non-human objects than actual physical bodies, which, anyway, I digress. So here is the statistics that Sarah Park Dalen and David Huck used. It comes from the Cooperative Children's Book Center School of Education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And every year they publish the amount of books that they receive, and they look at the demographics of those books. And so over here, the data comes up most recently from 2021. And there is a distinction between by and about. What you need to do to basically get the number here for the books received is you have to add these numbers together. They're not categories that overlap. The books that are by Black or African authors doesn't necessarily mean that these are the books that are about Black and African authors. And when you add them all up together, it won't necessarily make this number. And the reason why is because the CCBC only lists or counts a book if they can identify the specific cultural or racial group represented in the book. So there's oftentimes picture books where a character is brown, but then the cultural specificity is never mentioned anywhere in the text. And that's a very important thing for computer science books. Are we honoring heritages, or are we just kind of saying like, look at the colors and leaving the conversation at that? So yeah, I know that I'm running slow, so I'm gonna move us on, even though I really wish that I could talk more about this because I think it's fascinating. One tool that I will share with you all is the Diverse Picture Book Finder. This is Krista's baby from the NEH program that I attended. And what it is that it's an index of close to 5,000 books. And you can filter all of the results by these categories that you see here, which include things like religion, immigration, tribal affiliation, settings. So if you wanted a book that was maybe about BIPOC characters, but not set in the USA. And these are really, it's a very powerful tool. And one thing that the Diverse Picture Book Finder does different than the CCBC is they include this category of brown-skinned and or race unspecified characters. And if you just quickly look at the numbers here, you can see that this is one of the biggest categories, meaning that we are not being culturally specific, not we, let me rephrase. Many picture books are not depicting BIPOC children in culturally specific ways. And we risk a lot when we are not specific to ethnicity and other things. So I'm going to move into who is represented into computer science to really now say, okay, we now know what the demographics of the picture book publishing statistics look like. Let's look now at computer science and our own states. This came from code.org in 2020, and this is student race and ethnicity access to computer science. Looking at these demographics, what do you notice or what do you wonder compared to picture book publishing demographics statistics? And I will give 30 seconds and I will take a sip of coffee so I don't stutter over my words. The stats are don't match. White isn't the highest, so it's different than the picture book category. More representations of Asians in computer science, or Asian students, I should say. Give us a couple more seconds. Awesome. Yeah. So what we can clearly see is that the racial inclusion in computer science is different than those of picture books. And when we look at the computer science picture books, those demographics are even different than what we are seeing here with who is enrolled in computer science. We also know that girls and gender minorities are not as represented in computer science. This data comes from Girls Who Code. And one thing that is interesting is that inspiring teacher is listed both at junior high school and college as a positive motivator, as well as positive role models. And I would argue that we can boost girls and gender minority self-esteem through diverse picture books as well. And yeah, I see some notice in the chat that the data so far is not overlapping with gender and race, that specific intersection. This slide here, that's about California's data, is actually specifically going to address that. So California has a website called Computer Science for All, and it lists all of the demographic information about their computer science enrollment in the state. And since they're our neighbors, I thought it would be a great idea to look at this data. Only 5% of students are enrolled in computer science courses in the state of California, despite the high offerings by schools and districts. And when we look at their data, they have almost 50% equal girl and boy enrollment, but that data is not represented in the actual computer science enrollment, which is 70% male. This happens also with the overall and computer science enrollment for race. And so while only white and Asian students account for 33% of their overall enrollment, they are close to half of the total enrollment in computer science. And so on their website, they have an option to show their data through an intersectional lens. One of the points right here was hard to read. It didn't render very well, so I just added it here. That's the multiracial category. And I will spend 30 seconds on this. So this is both race and gender overlapping together. A 1 means the student is represented. Less than 1 means the student is underrepresented. What stands out to you about the data looking here? Native American is the lowest. Girls are underrepresented almost across every ethnicity and race. Boys are represented overall. And I would say they are represented, perhaps not overrepresented. To be overrepresented, it would have to be like this category here where it's like Asian boys, we could probably confidently say are overrepresented compared to their peers in computer science. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily true of like Latino boys in this data. And yeah, I like how some members in the chat are mentioning stereotypes, because I think diverse picture books can help disrupt those stereotypes, which hopefully I will get to because I know I'm running low on time. You'll have the access to the link to the diversity wheel that we looked at the beginning, but this is one way to start thinking about the intersections in your identities and how that is either in coalition with, or perhaps could prevent students from empathizing with you in your own computer science classroom. So we know that for computer science enrollment in the state of Nevada, that we are a leading state. As stated in our keynote this morning, we know that Nevada leads the way in terms of the amounts of policies that we have. We have 9 policies, and that's the greatest number across the United States. So it's very cool that we're in the top 5. But even though we are a leader, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're perfect. And so I will give you this link, but we don't have time to explore it. It's something I highly encourage you to do, though. It goes to the Nevada State Report Card. And so you would search by your zip code, find your school, and it has interactive data. And it's just good practice to think who is represented at your school. How does that compare to your county? How does that compare to the state? And then how does that compare to diverse picture books? Because depending on who is enrolled at your school, this could help create the mirrors or provide opportunities for windows at your school. So I know that looking at the color-coded key, I have a high enrollment of Latino students and Black students compared to the state and my school district. And that might be an opportunity for me to bring in more mirrors rather than windows when I am utilizing these picture books. And so the link to that is here. You can also look at how it changes over years to see if the demographics in your school, if you have any emergent enrollments or any enrollments of groups that are not as present at your school anymore, I guess. I don't know how I would phrase that. Cool. So sorry, I know I'm just strapped on time and I do want to give you some important stuff about the picture books. So I want to get to that immediately. But yeah, just to kind of recap, representation matters. It matters to the students. Students that can see themselves in the picture books and identify with the content are more likely to retain that information and retain it for longer amounts of time. We know that picture books are not representative of demographics, both in computer science and our state. And we know that looking at Nevada's unique demographics, that we have specific needs when it comes to picture book. And so let's talk about how to consider which picture books and where to find them, because I do have that information for you. When we consider which picture books to use, we're probably going to be looking at our NVAC standards. The gray hexagons here represent the content standards, and the blue hexagons represent the practice standards. So we started with this at the beginning of the presentation, and we know that diversity and inclusion is a big part of our practice standards. Once you choose some picture books, perhaps driven by the diverse book finder, you still have to think about what those picture books are saying about the characters in the book. So one thing that I have found, these are the 9 categories that the diverse picture book finder gives you. And what it means is that when there are picture books that show non-white characters, they fall into these 9 narratives. Any child means that you could change the race of a character and it does not change the plot. Incidental means it's a background character. Informational means it's a nonfiction text. So maybe it's about Mali. And so you're seeing Black characters, but it's not necessarily about their race. Folklore, so like cultural stories. Beautiful life means that ethnicity and race is a pivotal part to the plot. So I included an emoji with a hijab because normally when we have characters with hijabs, those books tend to make it a plot point. Biographies, meaning about famous people. Cross-group interactions where more than one racial group are interacting. It doesn't just mean white and another racial group, but that tends to be the one that is most represented. Race and cultural differences. Oppression and Resilience are books that specifically address injustice and racism. And so in terms of computer science, it tends to fall into this any child narrative. And so I really would encourage you all that when you are looking through these books to see how you can actually center race to represent the children that are in your classroom, rather than having this colorblind approach that tends to exist within the narratives. So, okay, I'm gonna skip past some stuff. The books that I'm about to share with you, because that'll be the last thing that I get to, they will only address computer science, but you don't need a picture book to be talking about computer science to teach about computer science. So these are some books, none of them are about computer science, but they are about computer science concepts like decomposition, debugging, and algorithmic thinking. What I'm going to provide to you right now, if you decide to bring these picture books into your classroom, you can still provide or apply the same qualitative discernment to these books as well. So I'm going to drop in the chat. I have a slide, a Google Sheets for you. And what this Google Sheets is, let me see, because now Zoom killed my presentation. Okay, going through it. Whoop. So what this Google slide deck, I keep calling it a Google slide deck. What this Google Sheets document includes are about 60 titles that I currently have. I only included titles that I actually had a physical copy of, but for sure there are more picture books than are on this list. I borrowed the categories that came from the diverse picture book finder for race and ethnicity and narrative. I also will note that I added to race and ethnicity a non-racial or non-human group, since as we learned earlier, animals and non-humans play a big role in the picture book industry. And I also included a white, Caucasian, European category because we also have white characters in computer science books as well. I included the narratives with a link to the diverse picture book finder. And how I would like to spend these last couple minutes is I would like you to choose one book, and I want you to Google or research that book and what kind of representation is inside of it. When you begin to create a diverse technology library, you might not know what that book's content or representation will be when you get it. So this is an activity that's designed for you to select one book and explore what content is inside that book. Who is this book representing? So as an example, I have a book up here called Doug Unplugged. And so when I did the Google search, I found a YouTube read aloud. Perfectly okay. I'm not expecting anybody to find PDFs of these books. And once you find and kind of look through it, how does that book represent the race, gender? Is there multiracial representation in the book? It's just a check mark or not? And what kind of narrative is it? So I have two examples here for Doug Unplugged and Goodnight Selfie. Both are computer science books. I filled out a racial category, a gender category, and the narrative category. And although we are strapped for time, what I think we would see if all of us completed this spreadsheet is that most of the computer science diverse picture books are going to have white or non-human children and have this any child narrative. So this is where our teaching strategies really come into play. Oh, sorry, I didn't link it. Thank you for telling me in the chat. This is where our strategies as teachers, where we can make an intervention to just even include diverse spaces. So yeah, I know I'm at 11:15. I know I need to finish, or sorry, I'm at 11:10 and I know I need to finish at 11:15, Fran. Does that include question and answer time, or do I have like 5 minutes after 11:15?
Definitely, I would suggest if you have an opportunity to wrap up, you'll be able to get those questions in so that the next speaker can prepare to present.
Cool. So what I'll say is let's leave these last 5 minutes for questions and answers or just discussion. I'm sorry. Like I said, this was a lot of content. I'm going to link the slide deck again, but everything that is in this slide deck, I included sources here in the speaker notes, which not on that slide, but especially for the data. So all of my slides include where I got that material from. And if you look in your own time through acquiring and implementing, I included links because I suspected that I would run a little long. So I do think that you are able to see ways of implementing these picture books through Heritage Months, through decoration, through lesson plans. I included an example for every grade band and one for every content standard here, as well as links to the lessons for you to visit. So I will link that again in the chat. And if you have questions, I would love to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I would love to talk about it.
I have a question, Victor, real quick. What is your favorite picture book for teaching?
For teaching in general or teaching computer science?
How about one for each?
Let me think about it. I will put a timer for 3 minutes because I know I will be wrapped up with this presentation in 3 minutes. And if I have an answer, I will answer it. That's a good question. I know that I shouldn't say this, but I think for computer science, I really like the Clicker the Cat books. And it's not necessarily that it's a diverse picture book because it falls into the trap of having an animal. But my students know that I love cats. And so immediately when I bring out Clicker the Cat, they're more engaged because they know I like it. And we bounce off each other in that respect. So I think in that sense, I'm a little biased just because I really like cats. But it's a great way for them to blend my interest, their interest, and the computer science. And so there's like 4 Clicker the Cat books. One's about like trolls, one's about apps, one is about internet safety, and I forget what the other one's about. So it's a great way to have like a reoccurring character throughout the year. And I think when you can bring your own identity and interests into the content, children are receptive to that. It's like they already talk about race and gender, whether or not you're going to bring it into your classroom. So that's why I think diverse picture books and centering those conversations can be a powerful tool, because as teachers, we can lead that conversation into certain directions. Any other questions? I have a question for Fran. Do I fill out the session survey for myself?
Well, I know that you did an awesome job. So if you'd like to, it certainly just boots the data, right? It totally makes it go up there.
Things to change for
Absolutely.
next time. Don't stutter so much. Take a chill pill, get a small massage before the presentation.
You were phenomenal, and I really appreciate the information that you shared. As obviously Vic indicated, there were many different opportunities to share those and computer science and VAX. And again, just reminding everyone that since K-5 computer science has been required by state law to be taught since 2020, the incorporation with the information that Vic shared today is phenomenal. Also exciting news for those of you in the Clark County School District. Just a reminder that starting next school year, every elementary school will have computer science on their report card. So getting the engagement and the opportunities of excitement of all of these, all of this information is definitely helpful. And as a result of that, embedding the computer science into instruction really allows for the creativity, especially based on the information that Vic shared today. I also shared the survey link in the chat. Please do not forget to complete that. And I want to again thank Vic for the amazing presentation that was shared today. So thank you so much, Vic. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining me today. Leave me 5 stars on Yelp. Call my principal, tell her I need a raise. So cool. I'll take my presentation off now, and I'll leave